The United Nations has criticised the UK for its failure to redress colonial-era land grabs in Kenya. Two clans, the Kipsigis and the Talai of Kericho County, were brutally evicted to make way for the tea plantations owned by white settlers.
6 UN special rapporteurs have written to the UK government expressing concern over its failure to provide effective remedies and reparations to the Kipsigis and Talai peoples. The Kipsigis and the Talai clans were brutally evicted by the British Army between 1895 and 1963 to make way for lucrative tea plantations owned by white settlers. Having never received any form of redress for the human rights violations they suffered, they filed a complaint to the UN calling for an investigation in 2019. Lawyers say the UK pursued an intentional policy of violent displacement after realizing the land in Kericho County was suited to growing tea. They argued the treatment of these Kenyans amounted to a gross violation of human rights. The British government was given 60 days to respond to the allegations and urged to take necessary measures to stop the violations and prevent their recurrence before the communication was made public. But it has not responded. In a new report, the UN has demanded that the British government must now provide responses and settle the matter with the victims, many of whom are still alive.
For a little bit more on this story, we're now joined by Margaret Monyani, who's a lecturer of international relations at Wits University here in Johannesburg. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Always good to talk to you.
Okay, thank you for having me.
All right, so a lot of people might be wondering, this case really has been going on for decades, going back to the colonial era. Why is it only now getting some kind of enforcement?
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, that is a very important question. So the issues of reparations, not just the Kipsigis. Remember, this is something that when they were moved from their land, of course they resisted. And the resistant movements that were there in Kenya, of course the major one that is known as Mau Mau, were outlawed at that time. So it was like, how can an outlawed organized group go to court and challenge and ask for justice? You understand? So after that, after independence is when now, like say, the issue of Mau Mau and those, the resistance groups, that the movements were then now, the ban was lifted, is when now they were able to move forward. And as you can see, they did not even go directly to Britain, because that's what should happen, because this is a state crimes. They're supposed to go directly to that country and demand to that state and demand for justice. But then in 1980, the British adopts a Limitation Act, which now says that you can only claim to get reparations, say at individual level, if these injustices you're talking about happened like 3 years ago. And if it is the land issues, 12 years. And you can imagine these are things you are noting that happened during the independence. So it becomes an issue. So the time limitation that has been adopted by the British has made it difficult for them to even go directly to the British. That's why they went through the UN.
Does the British government acknowledge these atrocities that were committed in the 50s and 60s?
So let me use the case of Mau Mau. That is also a very critical question. When the ban was lifted in 2003, the Kenya Human Rights went ahead to start the process of demanding for the reparations. But then when they presented these claims to the British, the argument was that the colonial government is not the current government. So the question of who will pay, that they cannot pay because the colonial government was different from the current government. And secondly, they have said that the liabilities were taken over by the Kenyan government that took over after independence. And so they try to run away from the issue. So this is something that has happened. And I think this is also what is happening at this point. But the Mau Mau people went through and pushed through and they got some bit of compensation. But initially, they did not want to pay right away. They said the colonial government is very different from the current British. So they cannot pay for what they were not part of it. But then there is the argument and even evidence that shows that when all these atrocities were happening, there was communication between the colonial government and the British government, which means they knew what was happening in the country. They knew what was happening against these tribes, but the British government did not do anything to stop the spread or of the atrocities. And that is where such groups are getting their argument and the reason to fight for their rights.
What has the Kenyan government been doing since independence to deal with these issues? Administration after administration has been receiving the royal family, has been playing a prominent role in the Commonwealth, and basically being friends with the United Kingdom, and yet this is what they did to Kenyans.
Yeah, you see, I get where you come from, and that is also a very critical question. You know, there's something that happens historically when you analyze the history. There's been the tendency of when the blacks, or say Africans, take over power, they take over power and also inherit institutions that are discriminating. So in a way, instead of now offering an avenue for these reparations, it's kind of they continue the discrimination, as in discrimination against fellow blacks. And that is why I mentioned earlier that you can imagine Mau that was outlawed during the colonial era. The ban was only lifted in 2003. That means we already have Kenyatta the presidency in place, the Moi presidents, and then when Kibaki comes in power in 2008, is when now 2003. Those are how many years, honestly, since 1963. So we see the government continue to discriminate these fellow Africans on those grounds. But then we see in 2019, this is not just 2019, we see 1932, this case of the Kipsigis actually was mentioned in the Kenya Land Commission report, that is during the colonial era, surprisingly, and they acknowledge that these two tribes should be compensated, that they faced some atrocities. And then in 2019, the Kenya Land Commission, the current one, also acknowledges that, actually made similar observations that indeed they faced some high level of atrocities, and that they also requested the Kenyan government should agree that they have slept on the case, like you are saying, for over that time, and then the citizens suffered. And again, they asked for an official apology from the British and many other reparations in other forms, monetary, restitution, and rehabilitation.
So who took this case to the United Nations then?
So yeah, they were working. The two tribes, of course, the elders came together, and then they had a lawyer, two lawyers actually, who went through. Of course, there is also the question of who should be compensated. So they did a little bit of research and went into history to check if there is evidence, indeed evidence, and that's when they realized that there is the land. Of course, the realization that there is the limitation or the British law that does not allow for such cases to be presented to the British government. That's when they presented the issue to the United Nations.
Are you optimistic that anything will come of this? The United Nations has issued a very strong word, terse statement, even giving the British government a deadline to respond with some kind of settlement, I guess. And yet they've missed the first deadline already. So it's almost as if the British government is just going to ignore this.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm very optimistic. Why? The reparations are legal and moral. Indeed, we can see that there is reasons why they should actually pay. One, they continue to benefit, the tea plantations we're talking about, they continue to benefit from, and they've made fortune from the land they took from the Kipsigis. So they're making profit out of it. Secondly, as I've mentioned earlier, these atrocities were committed with the knowledge of the British government. So there's no way. And then number three, I would also say that there is evidence that they have paid in some cases. there is precedence of payment, not just by the British, even German. We look at the case of Namibia and the US paying for slavery issues and all that. So there is precedence that reparations have been paid sometimes back. And so there's no reason why they shouldn't. I know the tactics, dilly-dallying is there, but ultimately, what if the Kipsigis and the two tribes stand the ground? I'm sure they will be able to find some. Maybe not as they wish, because like they're asking issues about having welfare funds that like they be paid not once off, but like forever, for a lifetime. I'm not sure that can happen, but I'm hopeful that they'll get something out of this.
The struggle here in South Africa is about re-ownership of the land. Is that something that the Kipsigis and the other clan tribe want, or would some kind of monetary compensation be enough?
Okay, so when I went through their application, I saw it's not really about having the land taken away from the tea plant, the multinationals, and being given it back to them. The other recommendations that are put forward. For instance, the tea companies should build schools, hospitals for those tribes, and make sure they have access to those social amenities, maybe for free. And not maybe, actually for free. And then there is the issue of having monetary compensation directly to the victims, and also for their families that come forward, because we have people that, of course, their grandfathers already died. Now we have grandkids that now are living right now. So they want some kind of welfare fund for them to take care of them in the long, for over a period. They do not actually, what I see is that they do not want a once-off payment. They want like a lifetime kind of payment that will take a while.
So it's quite a serious thing for the United Nations to issue a statement criticizing the British government. This is major. This is international level stuff. What has President Kenyatta said about all of this?
Okay, so far since the issue came out, I haven't heard him mention anything to that effect.
Really?
We hope, but he should, actually, as the head of state, he should. And I remember when Kenyatta, because he has also been at the center of all this, there is the understanding that actually his family, where he comes from, has also benefited from this. And I remember when he was campaigning, there were questions that are being directed at him. Like, people were asking, are you going to give back the family land that you got? Because there is the argument, or historical evidence shows that his family has also benefited from some of these lands that were taken over by the settlers. So when the settlers left, then the father took over, and many other big politicians in the country. But my hope, I hope that he will also push for this, and he will also make a very strong and be in support. The government should be in support. They should also show support to these two tribes. They should not just let it be about the two tribes to go and fight their own battle, but they should also accord them the necessary support.
All right. It seems as if it's quite clear what happened, what ought to happen in terms of some kind of redress. But what are the plantation owners saying, the farm owners saying? Have they commented on what's come out of the United Nations? We believe that some of these owners could be quite senior people with title.
Yes, actually, it's, the plantations in Kenya are owned by some company somewhere, and another company which is owned by another bigger company. Yeah, so there is that politics, and I'm sure they know what has been going on, because this is something that has been happening over years. So they know they are being targeted, and I know they're also working on counter strategies to maybe sweep this case under the carpet and let it go. They do not want to let go of the land because of the profits they're making out of it. So probably they're also making room, if the reparations go through, or there is any kind of compensation that should be accorded to these two tribes, perhaps I'm just imagining they should already be on the table working out something to in terms of building schools or a welfare fund. They should, because if the Kipsigis indeed push for repossession of the land, then they're likely to lose. And as you say, they're big, so they will not allow that. So the politics at play, you also look at the cost-benefit analysis. So I'm sure they're working out something. And my hope is that they work out something that will benefit the Kipsigis, because they have suffered, indeed.
All right, and that's where we'll leave it. Thank you very, very much indeed. Your insights greatly appreciated this evening. Thanks for your time. Good talking to you, Margaret Monyani.